Hello, and welcome to PwC's Asia Pacific Family Office Webcast. I'm Jonathan Flack, I'm the U.S. Family Enterprise Leader for PwC, and I'll be serving as your moderator and host today. Before we get started, I want to go over a few details and best practices for viewing this webcast. First, for a better viewing experience, I encourage you to close all your other applications on your computer. Throughout the webcast, we'll be asking polling questions to get a better understanding of you and your family office needs to make the content more relevant for you. Today's program will last about 75 minutes. We have time at the end of the webcast to take any questions from the audience, but I would like to encourage you to submit your questions at any time through the chat function within Zoom. Lastly, the webcast is being recorded, so you will be able to share this recording with other members of your family as well as other members of your family enterprise. During today's webcast, we'll be covering a variety of key topics that are on the mind of family offices, and we will specifically focus on Asia Pacific families and family offices. We'll start the discussion with an overview of family office structure, including location and talent considerations. Then we'll cover family office technology trends, including cybersecurity and data management. Lastly, we'll have a discussion on deal strategy, including deal flow, in-house investment deals, and sourcing needs. And we've reserved plenty of time at the end of the webcast to cover any questions, so please don't hesitate to submit your questions throughout the webcast. Let me start with some brief introductions. Here with you today, I'll start first with my partner and colleague, Danielle Faulkner. Danielle, tell us about your role with PwC and also where you're joining us from today. Danielle, if you could take yourself off mute. If you're keeping your bingo cards for the webcast, Danielle's the first one to join with the muted there. So start again, Danielle.
Okay, hi everyone. Very nice to be with you here this evening in Chicago. I serve as the family office leader at PwC, and I work very closely with my global counterparts to keep a close pulse on all of the trends and developments affecting the family office industry. As I mentioned, I live here in Chicago, where I was born and raised, and now live with my husband and 4 daughters, and recently have taken on another professional role of professional party planner, as this year we are celebrating high school graduation, 2 college graduations, and a wedding for my 4 daughters, so it's a very busy year.
Thanks, Danielle. Also joining us is a good friend and colleague from Northern Trust, Scott. Scott, tell us about your role and also where you're joining us from today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. Good evening to you, and good morning and good evening to everyone joining. So as Jonathan mentioned, my name is Scott Charlton, and I lead client development across Asia Pacific for Northern Trust's Global Family Office business. And our global family office business is really a dedicated group within the organization that has the privilege to work with around 500 families globally across teams in the US, Europe, the Middle East, and now Asia Pacific. And I have recently relocated to Singapore, where I am today, and have been here for about 6 months to lead the expansion of our business across Asia Pacific. And we've built out our Center of Excellence here in Singapore. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to a productive discussion today.
Thank you, Scott. And I failed to share where I'm from. I'm based in Nashville, Tennessee in the US, and Scott used to be here as well. So it seems we're a good export of talent here from Nashville to Singapore. So thanks for joining us, Scott. I appreciate it. Fernando, also a great colleague of ours. Thanks for joining us. Could you also share with your role and where you're joining us from today as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today. I'm a partner with Withers Cutter Wong. I am based in Singapore. I've been in Singapore for 10 years. Prior to that, I was in the UK. My practice is I'm a US tax lawyer. So I do cross-border tax and trust planning, and my focus for several years has now been on family office structuring and the attendant issues that surround it. Withers is a global firm. We work very closely with PwC across various jurisdictions. We're lawyers, and so we do a lot of the implementation phase of the planning together with you.
Thanks, Fernando, and thanks for all of you joining today. I'm excited for the content we have. And to kind of set the stage, we do a number of surveys globally certainly conversations with our clients, our family offices, and then discussions with our peer service providers like Fernando and Scott to learn and to collect what we believe to be kind of the hot trends related to the family office. And today we're going to discuss those trends and dive into a few of these at length. But just to frame this up, and you'll have access to these slides at the completion of our presentation today. But just to frame up a few as we have a conversation on this today, professionalization is a topic that is always top of mind for family offices, but I think it's become an even higher priority, and that's one of the reasons why we have it a little bit at the top of the list here. Family offices are looking a way to keep up with transactions on behalf of the family, new investments, new structures, diversification. And in order to do that, they're looking to implement systems, technology, processes and controls. So professionalization being a key piece there. And that's tied to one of the other ones down below, which is talent. We know that through the pandemic, through this shift in how we work globally, that the war on talent and the challenge of finding talented individuals and keeping those individuals is top of mind for each of you. The other piece is, I think there's other topics we have on here like continuity planning, wealth transfer. I would describe those as what we call evergreen issues. Those are issues that are always relevant for family offices. In order to do effective wealth transfer, you've got to also consider education for the family, development of the next generation. Those go hand in hand with continuity. And then later in the discussion, we're going to talk about what's happening in the deal environment. We're going to talk to you about some structuring things to consider as it relates to your deal flow. And then lastly, we'll talk about what seems to be a very hot topic with family offices, particularly globally, is cybersecurity and data privacy. We'll talk a little bit about jurisdictions as it relates to privacy and cybersecurity, some considerations for you here today. But these are just a few of the trends that we see that we think are important, and we're going to discuss through some of those topics today. So as I mentioned, we would like to collect data, and so we're going to do that a little bit in a live format as we go through this. We have a few polling questions that we would like to cover, and we're going to start off with our first polling question, which is really to get a little bit of feel for where are you sitting today? So our first question is really asking the question, where are you primarily domiciled, or where are you primarily located? You can take a second to answer that question, and we'll come back and see some of those results. So I know that, Fernando, you talked about living in the UK and then now being in Singapore. And I know, Scott, you've recently transitioned from the US to Singapore as well. What's been your favorite thing about living in Singapore, Fernando?
Oh, hard question. I'd say diversity. Diversity in terms of food and just the global hub that the city is. So, and until prior to the pandemic, being in one of the best airports in the world, being able to just, hop and visit Southeast Asia was amazing.
That's great. Scott, for you, favorite part in being in Singapore?
Yeah, hard to argue with any of those that Fernando mentioned, but for us, it's the weather. We're coming from Chicago, which has a pretty brutal 6 months of the year. So we're grateful for the sun and the heat and quite frankly, the humidity as well here in Singapore. That's
great. So we've got about 84% of the results in now. And so we're going to end the poll, and here's our results for you, okay? It looks like we've got about 40% of the participants are based in the United States. We have about 4% out of Hong Kong. We have 6% from Singapore, 13% out of Beijing, 19% out of Shanghai, and then another 4% in Japan, and we've got another 15% for other parts of Asia as well. So welcome to all of you, and thank you for participating in that poll. The question we often get out of the gate here before we dive into the three main topics is, what is a family office? A lot of families have different forms of family offices. They think of it in different ways. So I'd like to get the panelists' perspectives on this. And I'll start first with Danielle. Share with us, just when you hear about what is a family office, how would you describe a family office? And then I'll have Scott and Fernando weigh in as well.
Yeah, when I try to define a family office, which as you know, can take many different shapes and forms, I'm going to go broad because I know my colleagues here will add some specifics, but I see a family office as a network of support that's focused on meeting the needs of the family to manage their wealth, and their lifestyle and their aspirations. And we're going to talk about, the different forms of family offices a little bit later in the conversation. But as you know, each one looks a bit different because every family's aspirations are different.
Scott, do you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we define a family office as a unique family business that is created to protect and grow a family's capital. And we look at a family's capital in kind of 4 buckets. The first bucket is family capital, so how families stay together, how they communicate. Second is business capital. Is there an operating business? Was there a recent liquidity event? Third is kind of the financial capital, investing the assets, keeping track of everything that a family owns. And then the fourth is philanthropic capital, kind of the lasting contribution or the legacy that families want to leave as new generations come on. So pretty simple in its form, but as Danielle mentioned, it takes a lot of different shapes and sizes as each family is unique and different.
Fernando?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I might take as a lawyer, I might take the more legalistic approach, and I tend to think of it as an entity or a structure, a formalized structure, whereby people effectively coming together, exactly the types of individuals and key decision holders and trusted advisors that Scott and Danielle have alluded to, but they come in and they effectively function in a cohesive manner pursuant to a set of rules. So that might be my slight bent on this.
That's great. I appreciate that. So let's move to our first topic, which is structure. And I think we started with this topic because we know that families that typically have a cross-border element to them, where they have their family office or where they have their assets structured is top of mind. They want to think about asset protection. They want to think about what's easiest in order to serve their family that may be living across border. And so we started with structure. And so now that we've really kind of defined what we all believe the function of a family office is and talked a little bit about considerations, Fernando, one of the key questions we hear from ultra high net worth families and ultra high net worth individuals is, do I need a family office? What are your thoughts when you get that, and how do you answer that with your clients?
Yeah, so I don't think there's a single driving factor behind getting a family office or establishing a family office. I think it's usually a confluence of factors. I probably cite 5 as the major ones. I'd say succession planning is an important one. Is the idea that through the establishment of a family office, you want to provide a structured succession of assets. I should say that sometimes a family office per se alone, the entity, the box where you house your investments or your decision might not accomplish that goal on its own, but it's certainly a big step towards it. The other one is governance. So the desire to keep the family interests aligned, to bring discipline, common ethos to investment strategy, to philanthropy. Regulatory and tax. In this day and age, there's been lots of legislation that attempts to get to either obviously taxing profits, but also the ability to get information exchange between jurisdictions. So the idea of centralizing the information is very powerful, which is something that a family office can provide, and also leveraging existing tax incentives where those exist in doing this. Managing political instability, that's another key thing. So oftentimes families might want, especially as you said, Jonathan, the idea that families are located in different places, and they may want to leverage jurisdictions that have a better political climate, that have better rule of law. And also they may want to be able to gain a foothold in that jurisdiction from an immigration perspective. And lastly, it's the desire that I think families nowadays, they value a customized level of service. They want to have other types of features that are embedded into the management of the family wealth or the decision-making that is tailored to them and that isn't just sort of off the peg, so to speak. So just to top it off, I'd say there isn't a single one. I encounter that these 5 factors, some weigh more than others, depending on the stage at which the family is, the jurisdiction and where they're located, the ages, and so on.
Scott, you kind of think about this, and I think you've put together some really thoughtful questions that a family might ask themselves. Do you mind sharing those and some thoughts around that as well?
Absolutely. And I think you touched on it, Jonathan. When we talk to families about whether it makes sense for them to have a family office, we just encourage them to really think about the goals of the family, the goals of the wealth, and to help them think through some of that. We'll just offer some very open-ended questions, such as, what's the purpose of the wealth? How is your family stronger together? Does the family want to stay together? And who do you trust to potentially oversee, grow, and protect the results of the hard work that went into creating this wealth? And Fernando touched on it. For those who decide to kind of end up creating a family office, the primary driver of that is the customized solutions delivered by a dedicated team. There are other reasons, such as kind of pooled purchasing power of the family, privacy, confidentiality, succession that Fernando also touched on. But in the end, what we see is it's specifically built off of the family's goals, the wealth goals of the family, and how they want to really kind of stay together. And if a family office is a good mechanism for that, and they're able to commit to that sort of structure, then it really has a number of different benefits.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. So as we think about a family office, and we talked about at the top about how we define a family office in a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the different types of family offices. We'd like to ask our next polling question, which really centers around who is supporting you and your family today? And the question, and the polling question here is, how many dedicated employees do you have performing family office functions? So we're not really kind of lumping this into how many employees do you have in a family office. I don't want you to say, oh, I don't have a family office. We want to really kind of like step back from this and think about who supports your family and the different functions of your family office, and how many employees do you have here? And this will be kind of a quick poll that we'll do on this, because this is an interesting question that we're seeing with a lot of family offices, as we'll begin to talk about the different shapes and sizes of a single family office, a multifamily office. These numbers vary greatly. We know through the families we work with globally that they might have 1 or 2 people in certain jurisdictions where family members are, and when they step back from it, all of a sudden they kind of add that up, and it's a larger number than they fully expected. So supporting a family and the complex needs that each of you have is really important. So let's check the results here. Okay, so our results are 30% of you answered that you have between 1 and 3 employees. 25% answered between 4 and 6. We have 4% between 7 and 10, and then 17% of you noted that you had more than 10. So that's great data for us. So I think most of you at this point, we could basically say that over 50% have less than 6 employees based on that information, which I think is really helpful to us. So the next step, as I alluded to, is talking about the different types of family offices. And Fernando, you're involved with families creating family offices and setting up legal structures, et cetera. Could you maybe talk to us a little bit about the different types of family offices and what you see?
Sure. Yeah, so I suppose in the simplistic sense, their family offices typically would either be serving a single family. So it'd be a structure that's entirely designed to service the family. So we tend to call them single family offices. In the other side of the spectrum, and other end of the spectrum, we might see family offices which are designed and dedicated to assisting multiple families, and so we call them multiple family offices or MFOs. There are, however, other ways in which family offices sort of exist. One of them is in the context of embedded family offices. So we might have families that own an operating business, a venture, and within that operating business, there's a group of people who are entirely dedicated to the family needs, the individual family needs. And then the other is something that you might describe as a virtual family office, which is effectively a group of trusted or selected service providers who could be lawyers, accountants, asset managers, investment managers, who are basically dedicated exclusively to the needs of that particular family and who therefore are on call. I'd say that in Asia, the environment is the single family office is something that we are seeing as really the paradigm right now. What most people aspire to. When I arrived here 10 years ago, I tended to see a lot of embedded family offices. So a lot of these functions were sort of part of the business that was still being handled and owned by the first generation, the creators of the wealth. But as we get into a sort of jurisdictional, sort of a generational transfer, I think there's a desire to institutionalize the services and therefore move the embedded people out into the single family. I'd also say that, as we alluded to earlier, the family offices can service a number of functions, right? From something that's more akin to concierge to investment management. And I'd say that in Asia, the focus presently is mainly on asset management. And that probably has to do with the fact that the creators of the wealth, of what I would call the generation one, are still very involved in that process. And therefore, the assets are still very close, and the decision-making is still very closely held.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fernando. Scott, there's something that holds these families together, and we talk about governance a lot. And so there's never a webcast that we have with wealthy families and family offices where we don't touch on governance. Share with us a little bit of why that's so important, not only for latter generation or multi-generational families or in latter stages, but really important to establish it from the very beginning.
It is, Jonathan, and a lot of the governance and structures we see in place with our families is dependent on what generation the family leadership sits in. And for example, in G1, to Fernando's point, assets are still very close to them. So the governance a lot of times is G1 family member makes the decision, and that's the governance model. As families grow and they get into G2, G3, G4, we see a lot of committees, investment committees, boards, various other planning mechanisms to have an effective communication structure, bringing the next generation in. But really, at the end of the day, Jonathan, it comes down to having a communication plan and a decision-making process that's documented, that's shared, that's acknowledged by all family members. So there's really no surprises when it comes to how the family is making decisions, where they're allocating, what the future holds. I think having that documentation, having that process in place and shared is a key aspect to good governance within a family office.
And one of these other pieces of structure that's become a very hot topic for families globally is the use of a private trust company in their structure. Many of you families have your assets structured in some form of a trust, or you may have some of your assets in a trust. And so I'd like to go to Fernando, if you can share with us a little bit of some initial thoughts on the use of a private trust company in a family structure. And then Scott, I'll come to you as well to share some of your experience with it as well. But talk to us a little bit about what would drive a family to maybe create a private trust company. And are you seeing families use private trust companies more so than you have in the past?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, I am seeing a lot more interest in it. I should say that from the Asian perspective, a private trust company is still something that is relatively new into as a planning tool. It's not as widely used as it is in the United States. Nevertheless, I mean, the theme comes back to the idea of succession, and the sense that the establishment of the family office in its narrowest sense, i.e. as a vehicle, sometimes a company or a series of companies that are intended to hold the wealth and provide for the management of that wealth and various other decisions, isn't enough to really provide the succession. And so what one has to think about is layering a trust structure, or at least a mechanism that ensures that upon different people, upon the creators of the wealth, the generation one in this case, no longer being around, the assets and the decision making will be consistent and carried to generation two and so on. So in that context, the establishment of the trust is really useful. Of course, one of the key things is once a trust is layered, so to speak, above the holding company, above the family office, the trust becomes key also in terms of deciding how the income flows, how the benefits, the profits from all this activity are effectively going to be shared. And so for families, the idea of being, they have placed the most trusted people at the management of the assets. Those could be the actual family members or individuals who have been with them for a very long time. But the idea is they may also want to have those people participate in the decision as to how those profits get distributed, how the wealth gets administered from a legacy perspective. And that's where the private trust company, I think, comes in very, very handy. That's where it becomes very important and very useful. And for those who perhaps haven't come across it, when we talk about private trust company, we're effectively talking about having a vehicle, usually it's an entity, a company, that serves as trustee of the family trust that holds the family office. And so the idea is that whereas traditionally somebody would have gone to a professional, to a third-party professional, be it an independent trust company or a bank, to provide that trustee service, the private trust company effectively swaps that, and so it comes into place instead of the professional trust company. So it allows a family to essentially onboard a lot of that decision making as well. So it's very useful. It's useful not just for that, but also from a privacy perspective. It's particularly good because it allows the family to keep the decisions internal. And so yes, the short answer is it's certainly something that is very much of interest. Obviously, and maybe Scott can speak to that as well. Can chime in as well with his views. It adds a layer of complexity for sure that is not insignificant. And so to go from no structure at all to a family office structure with a PTC is quite a big qualitative jump. So I think people do tend to take this into baby steps, but certainly a decision down the horizon is the creation of the PTC.
Yeah, I can jump in here, Jonathan. Fernando, agree with all of what you said. And I mentioned kind of in my introductory remarks, our family office business at Northern Trust works with about 500 families globally. About 20% of those families have a private trust company. So we are seeing them more and more across our client base. But to Fernando's point, that's in the US and Europe. We haven't quite seen that across our Asian families. And I think as more Asian families professionalize their office, institutionalize, bring the next generation into the fold, we may see the private trust company come more to the front across Asia Pacific. And why we see families create private trust companies, obviously their wealth is going to be held in trust, multi-generational trust. They want that privacy. They want that more institutional governance model. And there's probably a complex asset mix. So there's probably an operating business in there. There's potentially a pretty significant real estate portfolio. There could be a stock concentration where putting a board of directors, a private trust company structure around that asset mix makes sense. And there's a lot of advantages to having a private trust company, control, continuity, privacy. But we always caution our families, it's a significant build. Costs are considerable. It's a commitment not only for the current generation that's leading the family, but also for future generations. There has to be buy-in on the rising gen. But if there's active participation, there's that buy-in, there's that professionalization, it really can be a model for long-term success and can be a sustainable family entity part of the governance model.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Scott. And I think what we'll do, we'll transition into some conversations, kind of wrap up our structure section here and just talk about geographical location, because we know how important that is for families who are cross-border, picking which jurisdiction may be of best advantage. And so, Fernando, going to come back to you because I know this is a heavy part of where you focus. Talk to us a little bit about both you and Scott have talked about how much you love Singapore and you're both based there. And so I think that seems to be an attractive place for a lot of Asian families to domicile their family office structure. But maybe talk to us a little bit about Singapore and then just other considerations as it relates to geography.
Yeah, very happy to. Singapore has been in the spotlight, so to speak, as a jurisdiction to establish family offices. Why that is I think they were very quick in adopting very clear legislation that provides good tax incentives and good immigration incentives for people who establish a family office here. They have a very mature and competitive banking and financial services market, and it is a jurisdiction that's well known for stability and rule of law. So I think that combination has made it very interesting. And the ecosystem that they've been able to nurture in Singapore in terms of particularly on technology investments and startups as a gateway to Southeast Asia have favored it massively. It's not to say that it's the only jurisdiction in Asia to consider. Hong Kong is obviously another very interesting jurisdiction when it comes to family office establishment, and we know that there are many family offices operating in China. But I'd say that Hong Kong has not moved as fast as Singapore has in relation to really creating such a tidy package, so to speak. But there is consultation right now for legislation that's effectively looking to create an alternative to Singapore and sort of taking many of the good tidbits that Singapore was able to tease out. So we'll see. It's possible in the next few months there will be something more coming down more variety, so to speak, when it comes to Southeast Asia.
Scott, what are you seeing with jurisdictions just staying within Asia at this point? Where are you seeing families really trending towards as far as locations within Asia? And then I'll ask you maybe to continue to share. We see a trend in the U.S. with a lot of Asian families domiciling their family office in the U.S. So maybe talk about jurisdictions within Asia and your thoughts there, and then maybe we'll get your thoughts, continue the discussion around the U.S. jurisdiction.
Yeah, absolutely. So we see Singapore as really a hub for global families. And what I mean by that is wealthy Asian families, wealthy Southeastern Asian families, but also wealthy European families, Middle Eastern families, U.S. So as these families get spread out and get out of home country, whether that's in Europe, the U.S., Southeast Asia, they need a jurisdiction that has quality advisors, that has good tax law and supportive of global families and global structures. And we really see Singapore as that hub. In the 6 months that we've been here. And we have clients in the US that have offices here. We have clients in the Middle East that have offices here in Europe. And we don't see that trend stopping anytime soon, especially as more and more families globalize, next generations are all over the world. They really require that global jurisdiction, and Singapore provides that for them.
And a lot of our families that are based in Asia have assets in the U.S. And so you can't talk about structuring with cross-border families in Asia without talking about domiciling assets and having exposure within the U.S. So maybe Fernando, talk to us a little bit in kind of our last question here as it relates to structuring about some thoughts that families should think about as it relates to their exposure in the U.S. and how they're structuring some of those assets from a tax and legal perspective.
Yeah, and that's a very pertinent question. From looking at this from the Asian perspective, so many families who are domiciled, resident in Asia, in most of the jurisdictions in Southeast Asia, at least, the tax on passive income is relatively low compared to Europe and the United States, and inheritance taxes also either doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it's generally quite low relative, again, to the United States and Europe. So one thing that is important to understand is that once investments are made into the United States, understanding and considering the exposure that could create to inheritance tax, to estate tax, and the exposure that it could create on passive taxation, so taxation on gains, it's very, very important. So when we can, however, structure, so when we are effectively establishing family office structures and we're thinking about investing towards the United States, we can certainly mitigate, we can certainly address those concerns, but it's important to get the right balance. Sometimes investing through a corporate vehicle might create a higher level of taxation than investing through a partnership, and so on. So it's really a question that has to be tailored to the specific needs of the family. In my experience, the asset classes that are most relevant, it used to be real estate. So real estate was sort of a 101. The kind of thing that everybody was interested in to have in investing in the US, and that's obviously very important. Nowadays, in the past 5 years, I'd say there's been a big trend towards angel investment, or effectively, VC investing into what could be startup or medium-sized ventures. In that space, it's also as important to think about the tax, but the type of structuring we might do might be different compared to what we would do in the real estate context. So again, there's a lot to be done, and it's certainly there isn't a one size fits all, but it's very important.
Yeah, the funding's different as it relates to VC investment, where on real estate, you've got typically one infusion of cash. You structure that flow of that cash over, but if you make a commitment into a venture capital fund or private equity fund in the US, you've got continual commitment, continual funding challenges to work through. And those all have to be thought through as it relates to structure. So yeah. Scott and Fernando, thank you for really getting into what we see as kind of some hot topics as it relates to structure. I want to turn to technology. Technology trends is, as I highlighted at the beginning, one of the biggest questions that we get from our family offices. They're dealing with an enormous amount of volume of data. Families are becoming more complex. They're diversifying their assets. I'm going to bring in my colleague Danielle here, who really spends a significant amount of time in the operations of a family office. And Danielle, talk to us a little bit about what you've been seeing. You've been in this space for a very long time. And I think what you've been able to see with digital transformation that's occurring in family office, the use of technology. Can you share with us a little bit of some of the technology trends that you're seeing?
Yes, I would say digital transformation and automation is definitely becoming more of a priority. I think we were helped out a bit by COVID and all of the remote work that took place. But family offices and the wealth management industry in general do have some catching up to do, as I think the overall adoption is lagging other financial services. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And becoming more digital brings opportunity for providing increased transparency, including near real-time and mobile access to consolidated financial information. And we're really seeing a growing demand there by the family members and the stakeholders. On the operations side, automation of more rules-based activities is definitely occurring. For example, we're seeing artificial intelligence drive automation of private fund investments and giving some real lift there as far as keeping current on the valuations and processing of capital calls and distribution notices. We are seeing family offices be more open to adopting cloud technologies. I think for a long time, just due to the sensitivity of the information, families were hesitant to adopt the cloud, but now that a lot of service providers or software providers are no longer supporting on-premise solutions, and a lot of their development and innovation is happening in the cloud, we are seeing family offices become more open to that and taking advantage of some of the benefits there, which we'll touch on in a bit. Open data architectures is something that is really important, which really gives you the ability to adopt more of a best of breed approach and technology strategy. And so this allows for better sharing of data amongst systems, which will empower more advanced consolidated data analysis to occur. And of course, as we mentioned before, privacy and security are really always top of mind.
So we talked about privacy and security being really critical. Scott, I know that Northern Trust helps a lot of their clients think about cybersecurity and supports clients on thinking about different policies and where their risks are. Would you share a little bit on some of the trends that you're seeing as it relates to cybersecurity and some things that families should think about?
Definitely. Thanks, Jonathan. And a lot of these will be what Danielle just touched on, but I'll boil technology trends into kind of three buckets. One is cyber and how to protect families, and COVID really enhanced all of this for all of our families as they had to quickly transition from an office environment to a work from home environment, now to a hybrid, to potentially back in the office. What does that look like across the cyber spectrum? Has a lot of families taking a fresh look at their providers. Do they need to enhance their providers, updating their firewalls, just really building a more enhanced infrastructure around their security? Second would be data quality. So a lot of our families have various sources of data. How do you normalize all that to have one source, and which will create a more efficient decision-making process? And then the last piece is creating operational efficiency. And that's, Danielle touched on a lot of these. Automation, AI, reducing manual processes are probably kind of the three main trends we're seeing across technology today from our client base.
Yeah, I would add one thing to it, Scott, just a trend that I've seen and something that's a little bit scary. So many families use outside service providers for a variety of different services, law firms, wealth managers, banks, et cetera. And oftentimes they focus on the bank accounts, the investment accounts. Do we have password security in place? Are we securing data associated with that? There's been some recent pirating of data at service provider at law firms. So I had a client in the US that had one of their law firm was hacked, and the data at their law firm was all taken for ransom. And our client then realized that they really didn't have any process or considerations for understanding how that law firm protected that data. And so giving a thought and giving a pause on who are you giving data to, not just the bank accounts and investment accounts, but other service providers. What data are you giving to them, and how do you understand what controls they have in place as it relates to protecting your data, I think is really something to think about there.
Yeah, totally agree, Jonathan. I mean, we're having more conversations earlier on with clients about Northern's data security. We're bringing in our Chief Information Security Officer, our Chief Technology Officers to have conversations with these really large families, because they want to know that their data is secure. And that wasn't the case probably 5-10 years ago. Now it's one of the first conversations that they want to talk about.
Yeah. Danielle,
yeah,
I want to come back.
I do think that diving in
Please.
a bit deeper on the cyber topic, since we're talking about it here, is the first step really is knowing where your data is. So as you mentioned, Don, understanding what service providers have access to your data, what are the protocols and the controls within the office? Are individuals allowed to download data onto their PC? Are you protecting personal devices from accessing your network? there's just a lot to think about there. And so we highly recommend that you do engage experts on this and think about doing a health check. A lot of family offices are already using a managed service provider to manage their network and their security, but having another independent party come in and do a health check and a penetration test is money well spent. It can really bring to the surface some vulnerabilities that you may not be thinking about. I also think migrating to the cloud is another good security measure, because really when you're in a cloud environment, you are leaving it to the experts to make sure that you have the right patches and the right protection in place. It's very hard to manage that on your own. And so really having a service provider that can do that at scale with the latest protections is a big benefit. And I would say we're also seeing family offices think about cyber insurance, and that would include ransom protection. We are seeing some family offices become victim to ransom attacks, and they're having to pay large sums of money to get access to their data and get their data back. And there's also another benefit to this insurance, because along with limiting your loss and the cost of retrieving your data, the insurance company will also help you make sure that you have sound controls in place, because they're going to want to make sure that you have good risk management for protecting that as well. So that's definitely something worth looking into.
Yeah, Danielle, you mentioned cloud, and so I want to kind of come back to the use of technology, because I think that's been, from what I've seen, I think one of the greatest shifts in the last, you can call it 10 years, or probably in the last 5 to 7 years, on the use of technology in family offices. What type of technologies are you seeing family offices adopting?
Well, the really good news is that more and more software companies are focusing particularly on the high net worth individual and family office space. So we are seeing some new capabilities come to the market that are very tailored to your needs. I would say data aggregation and being able to bring the data together and provide near real-time transparency into consolidated results, so that any individual in the family could see their consolidated balance sheet at any point in time. This is something that is enabled through, cloud technologies, as well as more sophisticated data feeds from your financial institutions, and that AI that we talked about on the private investments, which gets you your information quicker and provides more transparency from anywhere in the world for you to have access to that data. I would say the younger generation, especially, that has grown up, with a lot of smart devices in their hand, are accustomed to that sort of real-time transparency and instant gratification. And so as your family is getting larger and the family office is having to serve multiple generations, really paying attention to some of the leading technology trends is going to be important in order to adequately, serve those younger generations. I think we're also seeing a lot more focus on tax planning, especially in the U.S. And so providing more transparency into tax basis, tax adjustments, and the whole estimation and cash planning process around taxes. There's a lot of software out there that can tailor specifically to those needs. And then just the automated workflow and collaboration tools that are out there can give you a lot of efficiency and a lot of transparency into where you may have bottlenecks or may need to rethink your processes if you're seeing some information get slowed down along the workflow. I think family offices are finally starting to realize the benefit of AI. And again, that's more particularly in the private space where you're getting data via K1s or capital statements. It's amazing to think that this industry is still so focused on PDF reports, but I think by and large, those private partnerships are issuing K1s in a PDF, as well as your capital calls, distributions, and evaluation statements. And so having that machine learning and artificial intelligence to automate the reading and processing of that information is becoming a real reality. And we've been helping a lot of large financial institutions automate that at scale. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Scott, Northern Trust obviously is a custodian. You're a wealth manager. You're a trust company. You've got a multifaceted. So you're processing, managing, providing a lot of data, services, and technology solutions. Can you share with us a little bit of how you're thinking about the use of technology and how that's been an advantage and some things that you guys are investing in?
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, Jonathan, I mean, our families that we work with are running global multi-asset class portfolios, typically with a heavy allocation to alternatives, co-investments, direct investments, all of that. So the need for technology, the need for consolidated reporting, the need for efficient decision making is a conversation that we're having daily with our families. And what they're looking for is a lot of the feedback we get from clients is, I spend so much time gathering information for an investment committee meeting or for a board report or for a meeting with the family that I don't have enough time to actually look at the data and make an informed decision about it. So they need efficiencies on the consolidation front to have more visualizations, easier access, to then have more time to actually make decisions and be more informed and advice focused with their family members. So that would be one. Second, as we all know, in the family office world, there's a lot of different stakeholders. You've got family members, you've got C-suite executives within the family office, you have your accountants, you have outside advisors, trustees. So the need to see data is different across all those stakeholders. So the technology that our families are looking for and on what they want to try and implement is a platform that speaks to all of those different stakeholders in a way that they want to see the data. So being able to customize reporting, being able to see it on the go is kind of the baseline now that we see in a technology platform in what providers need to provide families.
Thanks for that, Scott. And we're starting to get a few questions in on the chat function, so it's a good time for me to remind you, just if you have any questions that you want for us to answer for you, we'd be happy to address those as we go through. So feel free to post those in the chat function. Maybe just to wrap a little bit of this section, Danielle, we talked about just some of the challenges as it relates to cybersecurity, data protection. What are some other challenges for family offices? You know, not all technology is a bed of roses, but what are some challenges that family offices need to think about as it relates to the use of technology?
I think by and large, upskilling your employees in order to fully optimize and take advantage of these automations and digital transformation is something that we see be a really big need in this space. It's hard as a smaller company to stay current on all the technology development that's happening. And we have seen family office that have invested in the technology, but they're not even aware of the new capabilities that the software provider is pushing out to the families. So a lot of times if you're on a software as a service or cloud application, the software companies will push out new releases to you, and there will be release notes provided, but not everybody pays attention and takes advantage of those capabilities. So making sure that you have employees that are kind of empowered to be a champion for the technology and make sure that everybody is aware of the latest capabilities and that the family office is taking advantage of those. I often work with family offices where, you know, they're still working on QuickBooks and Excel, which I think is perfectly fine for earlier stage families and family offices, but you reach a point where you do need more sophisticated capabilities and controls. And so change management around that is really important because we see some employees wanting to revert back to, you know, their spreadsheets and some manual processes that are in place. So making sure that you have somebody who is focused on the change management and enforcing the use of the new technology and really challenging people to think beyond the status quo. And that really is a culture change, I think, for a lot of organizations. And then just one quick comment on the cybersecurity. I think the biggest challenge there is really family and employee education, because you can have the greatest protections in place, but if your employees and your family don't understand the risks and the appropriate behaviors to make sure that those protections can really be optimized, that's really important. So you need to focus on people understanding where the data resides, why we have certain policies and procedures in place, when it's appropriate to use a remote network, and all of the protections around that. And for the family especially, what's important to have on social media. All of those things go into your total, cyber policy and protections. So making sure that you have education around that is really important.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just to kind of wrap up the technology section, we'll do one polling question because I want to get to our deal strategy section here, because I know that that's top of mind for everyone here too. So maybe we'll go to our last polling question here, which is, has your family or has your family office, your company, or your family directly experienced a cyber attack in the last 3 years? So if you could take a second to answer that polling question. I'll share one more thing as it relates to talent and upskilling, because I think it's, want to make sure that we underscore it. Just to share kind of PwC's journey a little bit as you're answering the polling question, we've invested more than $5 billion in the last 7 years in upskilling our employees within the firm. And we've committed to investing another $2.5 billion over the next 3 years in upskilling our team members. That's a dramatic amount of funds obviously for our organization. But if you think about just the importance of being able to keep up with trends and making sure that you have the right talent and the right skills within your organization to keep up with data, the shift of technology, et cetera, it's extremely important. I would make it a priority as you think about talent development and the amount of money that's necessary in order to upskill those individuals. So let's take a look at the results here. I hope these are really low and nobody's had any phishing or anything there, but it looks like we've got yes, but our security prevented the attack. Oh, that's outstanding. Yeah, 20% there. Yes, and identify theft. We had 12%. And then of course, phishing. I probably check the phishing box so many times on a daily basis. So I would definitely be checking that one there. So thank you for that last polling question there. I want to move just finally, and Scott, we'll have a lot of the conversation here as it relates to deal strategy. When families had liquidity 15 years ago, they got a balanced portfolio at a wealth manager, and they kind of set it in there, and they said, let's just let it ride. And if we need to pull something out, we'll deal with it. But the rise of private equity, the amount of public capital that has moved into private capital, family offices have led the way on that for the last couple of decades. So I really want to talk about deal strategy and about continued opportunities for family offices here. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about why we're seeing this shift in deal strategies for families? What should be top of mind for these families as they think about their investment portfolios?
Absolutely, Jonathan. I think you hit it on the head in those introductory remarks. Family office portfolios have evolved from stocks, bonds, cash to everything: real estate, private equity, venture capital, direct investments, all of that. And
Bitcoin.
Crypto, yeah, exactly.
Bitcoin, right? All over the place.
Throw everything into the pot, and family offices are open and have the means in the long-term investment horizon to allocate to those sectors. I think maybe I'll just take a quick step back on and just share four very high-level themes on just what's top of mind from our families on their investment portfolios. And I'd say that the first thing is right now the market volatility. And I loop in the rising interest rate environment, inflation, geopolitical concerns, all into that bucket. Fortunately, a lot of our families, as I just alluded to, very much long-term focus. So view a lot of this volatility as an opportunity, putting some cash that they've had on the sidelines to work and taking advantage of some of the dips. Second, we touched on it, an increasingly and an ongoing focus on alternative assets. Direct investments, private equity, co-investments. In the conversations I've had in Singapore and across Asia, very much focused on deal flow, sourcing, access to managers. So continues to be top of mind for all of our families. The third theme I'll say is balancing generational differences. So as rising gen come up to the more of the forefront. Families kind of have to take a step back and take a fresh look at their portfolio. Perhaps that's an ESG tilt. Perhaps that's looking at crypto or other asset classes like that the current generational leadership doesn't look at today. And then the last thing I'll say is families want to know what other families are doing. And the conversations we have with our CIOs who run these family office investment portfolios is they want to dialogue with other families. They want to potentially partner on deals, but it's less about partnering on deals and more about having that peer community and just to bounce ideas off of, share best practices. As many of you on the line who may work in a family office, sometimes it can be a little bit of a lonely place unless right. you're well networked, you have a community. And you can share ideas and best practices. It's important that we provide families that community, and that's a big part of what we do with our families at Northern Trust in our family office business is connect clients who want to be connected to learn, share, and engage.
Yeah, Scott, it's a huge point. Networking in this space is difficult because there's a lot of families that are growing and expanding, but they want to be private. Use your service providers, PwC, Northern Trust, other organizations to connect you to other families because there's a huge desire amongst our clients to learn from each other. I think that's just a great part of this community. And I think there's definitely a willingness for families to want to share. So I think that's great. We began the conversation around structure that included a conversation around governance. And governance, I think, is one of the most popular terms that we use in the family space in general. But governance is really important as it relates to monitoring the investment portfolios for clients. What is typical investment structure that families need to consider here, Scott, for their investment portfolios?
Yeah, a lot of the answers to questions in this space, as you know, Jonathan, is it depends, of course, right? And governance is no different, and it just depends what the family is insourcing, what they're outsourcing, what the expertise they have in-house. But from an investment standpoint, there's kind of what I'll say 3 common governance mechanisms that we see. And the first is an investment policy statement or some sort of investment framework that really lays out the asset allocation, the goals of the portfolio, risk and return profiles. So in times like this, when there's a lot of noise in the market, families can not be concerned, but they know they have this framework in place and they can continue to lean on that to help them navigate terms of volatility. The second is an investment committee within the family office. And this goes back to my earlier comments around governance, on documenting how decisions are made, who's sitting at the table, communicating that out to family members. We see the investment committee as a way to bring in the rising generation, perhaps initially as a non-voting member for that individual to get a sense of what's talked about, what the decision-making process looks like. And as that generation continues to come more to the forefront, adding them as a voting member. And then lastly, we're seeing an increased use of independent directors and independent investment committee members for these families. They really bring, obviously, an independent view, but an outside expertise and experience. They bring their own network. So when we talk about kind of sourcing and strategies, they have their own network that can add to the family's network. But really, it comes down to objectivity and accountability in the face of family dynamics, which we know there always is in this segment. And having an independent director really creates that impartial voice and greater level of objectivity from a governance perspective.
Yeah, the objectivity, Scott, I think is a critical word. We're hearing from a lot of families, they're constantly being pitched on all kinds of new investments, different types, et cetera, but from multiple different parties, and making sure that when that idea is pitched to the family, to the chief investment officer, once that individual leaves the room after their pitch, is there a good objective discussion around, does it fit? Is it the right piece? How does it fit within the framework that we've created? I think is really, really important. as clients source new deals and have these new investment ideas, how do you see your clients sourcing these, particularly as it relates to direct and private investments? Talk to us a little bit about where they're sourcing a lot of these deals.
Sourcing direct deals for families who have the scale, one of the top issues or top priorities for them. And again, conversations we're having on a regular basis with families across Asia is, how do I get access to that manager? What deal flow do you have for me? So in order to partner very well with families in this part of the world, deal flow being kind of that front foot forward from an advisor's perspective is critical. And when we think about direct and private and co-investments, where our clients today are getting that flow from, a number of different ways, but I guess I'll talk about 5 here. And first is that family office investment team. So if you're allocating as a family to this space, you most likely have some institutional talent who have worked in private equity, venture capital, or one of the sovereign wealth funds who have a network, have relationships with fund managers who take those relationships with them as they go in-house to the family office. Second is family members. So using family members networks, people they know. Some of our family members are titans of industry, entrepreneurial in nature. So they are well known across the private equity, venture, in direct deal space. So a lot of the times they'll have managers and interest kind of knocking on their door. The third is through third-party investment advisors. So partnering with a Northern Trust or someone else who has expertise in this world to source deals, bring them ideas, and really, I think you're using third parties to find those hard to access managers, not necessarily the most well-known private equity managers, but some of those middle market, really good managers that some family offices and family office investment teams may not know about or may not have access to. The fourth is other family offices. So to our point about community and connecting with clients, there's certainly that avenue of being able to network with other families who go to market together and do investments together as their outlooks align. And then the last way is co-investment opportunities brought to families by some of their existing fund manager relationships. So I would say those were probably in order of the most common ways we source. So starting with the investment team, family members, third parties, other family offices, and then co-investment opportunities from other managers.
Yeah, so I think it's a good time for a polling question. So we'd like to understand, like, where do you source new investment ideas? So we're going to pull up another polling question here. Tell us where you source your investment ideas, and we're only kind of allowing for one choice here. So I might reframe this. We have this as primarily sourced your new investment ideas. So what's kind of your top choice here of where you typically source your deals? And again, I encourage each of you to post any questions you have. We're going to transition here towards the Q&A section in just a minute. So happy to answer any questions that any of you have. Let's take a look at the results of the poll. So family office staff, looks like number one choice is third-party provider, investment advisor. So as we expect, that's obviously the number one choice there, but personal network and other family offices is the second highest choice. So that's great. Appreciate the feedback there. I'll go to kind of maybe the last question here. And Scott, I want to talk a little bit maybe about, we talked about technology and data. And so kind of want to move a little bit into how are clients thinking about monitoring, tracking, and making decisions on their portfolio and how they're managing that data. Share with us a little bit of what you're seeing here. I know on the PwC side, we've really seen a shift in how family offices are managing this.
Yeah, it's becoming an increasingly important aspect of managing a portfolio, Jonathan. I mean, hiring the investment team, sourcing new investment ideas, putting together an asset allocation. If you don't have an infrastructure behind that and you don't have a mechanism to track, report, analyze, and make other investment decisions off of the decisions that you've already made, you are presenting a number of different risks. So the use of technology across our families is more and more important. And Danielle touched on this in the earlier section, just families running on Excel. And I have a lot of conversations with families who are on Excel, tracking billion-dollar portfolios on Excel. And the conversation that I like to ask them is, have you thought about the risk with that? And have you thought about key person risk? Have you thought about institutional risk? Have you thought about cybersecurity risk? Sure, it's maybe a little bit more inexpensive to do that on Excel, but the risk, I think, outsized the cost of using technology within the family office. So what I like to just ask is, what do you own, and how long does it take to put together a balance sheet of the portfolio? And that's just a great way to learn and hear how families are monitoring their portfolio today. And that really opens up the technology conversation of, here's what we can do for you. Here you have private equity, you have hedge funds, you have venture capital, you've got equities, global equities, cash. You need a system, a platform to handle all of that, and not using a vendor for private equity, a vendor for equities, a vendor for your general ledger. So the use of almost a one-stop shop is becoming more and more of interest to our families, again, because it's all coming down to that efficiency. It's all coming down to making an informed decision. So the use of global custodians, the use of technology, creating that infrastructure really allows our clients to mitigate a ton of risk and make more informed decisions. And I think in Asia specifically, as we've been here and having conversations into the market, we're really seeing a trend towards more institutional, more professionalization, more technology, more infrastructure for these families, because they are getting increasingly more complex with their portfolios and are requiring that level of infrastructure.
That's great feedback, Scott. I appreciate that. So I want to move in just the last few minutes of our webcast here into some Q&A and address some of the questions we have here. And so I'll start with the first question that we have from the audience. If I'm interested in setting a family office up, how should I start the process? Who should I talk to first? And when should I reach out to the professionals? So I might come first, Danielle, to you on this one, because you do a lot of work in helping to set up family offices. How would you help a family think through that if they're working on thinking about setting up a family office?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, and I think we touched on this when we talked about the definition of a family office, is really understanding what are the primary goals and objectives of the family and the family office. And that's going to drive the infrastructure, the skill sets, and the operational capabilities that you need. And so I do think, seeking outside advice of people who have done it before, because you don't need to recreate the wheel. There are streamlined ways of cutting through and asking the right questions to get you to a good result. So I would recommend, discussing with somebody who's done it before, whether that be other colleagues or professional advisors. I do think one risk that we see when you're talking to other families that have set up family offices, you may not be aligned on goals and objectives and needs and preferences. So what works for one family may not work for another. So just be cognizant of that as well. But I think really getting down to the requirements around the goals and objectives of the family, and then building the appropriate right size infrastructure around that are the right place to start.
Fernando, do you want to maybe add anything to that? Because I think you get involved a lot in the setup of family offices as well.
Yeah, no, I think I echo what Danielle said entirely, particularly in the context of I want what he's got. I spoke to my friend, and he's done this, and I want to do the same thing, and that's really not the right way to start the conversation. It's really about understanding what the ultimate objectives are, what that family office needs to drive for that family specifically. Obviously, I get brought in when the conversation really turns into, okay, we've established we want a family office, and we've established that we need it to tick particular boxes. So let's make sure that we get down to it and we really tick those boxes. I think that kind of, to answer the question, sort of eliminates me as a first port of call in some respects, in the sense that I do think it's a more, kind of blue sky conversation about what are we going to do, what are we going to drive towards, and then once you've sort of taken some shape and you say, okay, these are the objectives I want to satisfy. Now let's go to the people, to the architects, so to speak, and let's get them to sort of sketch out what this box, what this house is going to look like. So yeah, I share that view.
Yeah, we've seen buyer's remorse, haven't we, Fernando, where somebody does go and set up the family office or create the family office that their friend also has, and then realizes at some point later that that's not what they wanted or needed or expected. And a lot of that has to do with, this brings to the next question, which is great, about what do these things cost? Danielle, I'll start with you maybe on this one, and Scott, maybe you can chime in as well. If I'm trying to budget for a family office function, what should I expect? How much is this thing going to cost?
So that's a loaded question because it really does depend on the complexity of the family. So, a family that is investing primarily in marketable securities or is managing an operating company is going to have a very different cost structure than a family that is doing direct deals and is investing in a lot of different alternatives or other complex financial assets. And so it really does depend. But I think on average, we see, on the low end, 10 to 25 basis points and 100 basis points on the higher end would be a reasonable range.
Yeah, and employees is a factor, like number of employees that you have in-house, complexity of assets, complexity of legal structure, number of family members, and then, how many actual services being provided to the family and those assets. I mean, to me, that's always kind of the 5 pillars that I think about. Scott, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I echo all of those comments. I would just say, be committed if you're thinking about it in doing it the right way and hiring the right talent, investing in them, making to retain them. So while cost is important, sure. If you're committed to building the family office, there are certain things you can outsource versus insource to help reduce some of that cost. But my only guidance to families is don't create a family office and try and do it on the cheap and hire a bunch of talent on the cheap, because you're setting yourself up to fail if you try and go that route.
And last question associated with this too, like what types of family office functions are commonly outsourced? It's the last question that we'll take from the audience there.
I could jump in here.
Weigh in on that.
Scott,
I'm going to turn it around and say what's most likely to be kept in-house. And typically what we see is that bookkeeping, that financial reporting, some of that cash flow, bill payment, estate planning, investment piece, tax planning, we typically see done in partnership. So maybe there's 1 or 2 people inside the family office, but then they're bringing in the PwCs, the Withers, the Northern Trust to help partner with families on those fronts. So and then everything else is, of course, it depends on the family's needs and goals and in the team inside the office.
I mean, I'll say that I think there is a service provider just about for every family office function. You can outsource the activity, but you can't outsource the risk or the monitoring that needs to take place. And so keep in mind, you may outsource certain functions, but you need somebody knowledgeable on your team to monitor that service provider and to hold them accountable and to be managing the consolidated risks of the organization. So we often see, maybe bringing on a C-level person, whether that be your chief investment officer or your CFO, and they can manage a pool of service providers, even doing some of that, bookkeeping and accounting. You're still going to want that CFO level analysis to occur. So I think really paying attention to making sure you have appropriate oversight and risk management in place is really important.
Yeah. Thank you, panelists. Scott, Fernando, our outside guest, thank you so much for starting your day with us, sharing your insights, extremely insightful. Thank you very much for doing that. Danielle, thank you for staying up late with me here in the US and sharing your insights as well. I want to thank all of you for joining us this morning, this evening, wherever you might be joining us. I know we had about half the participants or a third of the participants in the US and the 2/3 in the Asia region. So thank you so much for this. We'd love to hear your feedback on how this went for you, what insights you got, what you'd like to hear from us next. We plan on having these as regular webcasts, and we'll bring in different advisors and outside specialists to speak. So we'd love to hear your feedback on what you'd like to hear from. Thank you again from PwC. I'd like to wish you all a great day and a happy evening, and thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.